Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. As we have started a session of British history, in this regard, we are going to cover the next topic, and this is the second lecture. As you know, my name is Salahuddin, and I am preparing for the competitive exams for the last 4 years. I have rich experience in the said subject which I am teaching right now. So the next topic that we have talked about as well in the previous lecture, and that was glorious revolution. So we talked about the causes of the glorious revolution, and today we will talk about the events that led to the glorious revolution. What were those events that took place and made possible the glorious revolution? There might be certain events which consequently smoothen the way for the glorious revolution. In this regard, we will talk about all those events that made possible the glorious revolution of 1688. So first we will talk about the events that took place and made possible the glorious revolution. So what were those events? The first event that took place was the invitation by seven great men of the country to James' daughter and her husband William up range. This was the first event. The invitation was from the seven great men. Who were those seven great men? They were people from church, they were people from the court, and from the both parties, Whig and Tories. So their invitation uh, uh, exactly smoothened the way for the glorious revolution. Means these seven people, they were in a kind of reconciliation with William of Orange and his wife Mary, the daughter of James II. This was the first event that made possible. The second event was the William and Mary landed at Torbay with 15,000 soldiers on November 5, 1688. So they both William and his wife Mary, they came with a mighty force. They had 15,000 soldiers, and they landed on a place which is known as Torbay. The place is located in England. So this was the second event that smoothened the way for the glorious revolution. This was the second event. And the third event was that William proceeded against James, but finding his men deserting him, he abducted the throne and fled to France. So in the third event, when William landed there uh, against James II, so James II had also a mighty force, but those people started deserting him deceiving James too. They were not taking side of James too in this contest. So this was the third event that smoothened the way for the glorious revolution. And the fourth event that made possible the glorious revolution was the convention parliament offered the crown to Mary and William jointly after getting the declaration rights signed by them. So when William and his wife came to the throne, they signed the Declaration of Rights. So we will also talk about the Declaration of Rights. What was the Declaration of Rights, and how it made possible for William and his wife to come to the throne of England. So these four events made possible the glorious revolution. All right. Now we will talk about the the mm, the very important topic that is often asked in the paper, and I think question many times question have been set on the same topic, that why glorious revolution is uh, known as, why glorious revolution is called glorious revolution. ग्लोरियस रिवोल्यूशन को ग्लोरियस रिवोल्यूशन क्यों कहता है? सो दिस इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन. We will substantiate this with the following arguments, that why glorious revolution is known as glorious revolution. In this regard, there are some points which need to be talked on. The first and important reason is it was a bloodless revolution. It was a bloodless revolution. The first important point is the bloodless revolution. Or it is also often asked in the paper, to make it a bit more tricky. They ask in question paper, why 1688 revolution is known as glorious revolution. So the first important point is it was a bloodless revolution. As we hear the word revolution, it brings to our mind something really brutal and something really abominable. So this revolution was completely bloodless. No execution, murder, and butchery took place in this revolution. After the glorious revolution, we have also French Revolution, where millions of people died and murdered and beheaded the kings and the monarchs. But before glorious revolution, there was another revolution also that took place in England, and that revolution took place as a result of 7-year wars. And the war was started in 1642 and lasted till 1649, until the King Charles I was overthrown and executed. And in that revolution also, people were died, the king was executed. So all other revolution in the history, it was not devoid of killing and beheading and execution. So the first important point is it was a bloodless revolution, therefore it is called glorious revolution, the first important point. The second important point was it was based on consent and compromise. How it was based on consent and compromise. The glory of the revolution lay in the fact that the Whig, the Tory, the Church, and the dissenter all made a common cause. The whole English nation was participating. The Whig, the Tories, both were in a kind of they were different politically. Still, they had one cause, and that was to overthrow the kingship of James II. And the other dissenter as well. And moreover, the most powerful faction of that time was the church. And the church was also in favor of overthrowing the kingship of James II. So, in this way, the entire fabric of the English society was in compromise to overthrow the kingship of James II. So it was based on consent and compromise in this way. And the third important point due to which it is the 1688 revolution is called as glorious revolution was the uh, its result were both important and permanent in nature. When the glorious revolution took place, it completely changed the nature of government. It curbed the power of king. Parliament arose victorious. The king the king were the king was no more an authority to levy taxes. The king could not arbitrarily decide any matter. The rule of law was established. So all these factor in one resulted in the supremacy of the parliament. Thus, these results comprehensively led to the supremacy of the parliament, and the king was curbed in power. So this was the third important point due to which the 1688 revolution is called glorious revolution. And more importantly, the religious toleration, it was really a great problem at that time, and the religious toleration took place in both Catholic and Protestant. They were tolerated as a result of this glorious revolution. And the fourth important reason due to which 1688 revolution is known as glorious revolution is the it greatly enhanced the prestige of England. This revolution, due to which the prestige of England was enhanced. Earlier, Louis XIV, he was in a kind of power at that time, which where he could dictate the King of England to decide on the personal whims of the French. The foreign policy, even the domestic policy, was lying in the hand of the prince or the king of France, Louis XIV. So, how the prestige of England was enhanced? It was enhanced in this way that now the French was segregated. The earlier James II, who was a kind of puppet in the hand of Louis XIV, once the king William and his wife came to the throne, now they decided independently the matters of the England. So thus the prestige of England was enhanced. Moreover, England also started making allies. Allies, he made alliances with Spain, Holland, Germany, some states of Germany. So thus, earlier James II could not do so because he was playing in the hands of French. Thus, due to these factors, this revolution of 1688 is known as a glorious revolution, and it also resulted in the prestige of England. Now we will talk about the the results of the glorious revolution. So, what were the results of the glorious revolution? First, we will talk about the points that these were the results of the glorious revolution. The first important point is the end of the divine right of kings and success of the people. Earlier, we will talk in detail on every point, but just giving you a through over these points. Earlier, the king was kind of lieutenant of God on the earth. So, end of the divine right of the king and the success of the people. This was the first important result of the glorious revolution. The second important result of the glorious revolution was the supremacy of the parliament was established. Earlier, parliament was just a puppet in the hand of James II, and he could not decide anything arbitrarily. It was solely lying in the hand of James II or the king. So this was the second important result that parliament became supreme. The third important result was the establishment of the constitutional government. The fourth important result was the independence of the judiciary. As we talked about in the glorious revolution in the previous lecture, that the king would envision a kind of court by which through which he could serve his own purposes and his aims. But now the judiciary was completely made independent. The fifth important result of the glorious revolution was the fate of Roman Catholicism was doomed forever in England. Catholicism was doomed forever because Catholicism was the religion of the Roman the follow. It was the religion mostly followed in Roman, and the people following that Church of Rome were known as Catholics. So the sixth important result of the glorious revolution was beginning of the period of religious toleration. We will talk about it, how religious toleration was enhanced. And the seventh important result of the glorious revolution was the England once again become a first-rate power in Europe. And lastly, the eighth important result was England was forced to take part in the politics of Europe. So these were the results of the Glorious Revolution. Now we will talk about on every result in detail, how the result uh, was was in a kind of uh, what were the results and how those results helped England, and how much this 1688 or the Glorious Revolution was important. So it shall be analyzed as a result of these outcomes. So the first important point that we talked on was the end of the divine right of kings and success of the people. This was the first and important outcome of the Glorious Revolution. So the revolution of 1688 established the right of people and elect a king to remove his by uh, remove him for his wrongs. They did not dare to rule according to the theory of divine right. Now the people had the right to remove the king. Now the people had the right to elect the king. So this divine right earlier as James II would behave as he is the lieutenant of God on the earth. Now the king could not behave in this way. So this divine rightship of kingship was erased from the society of England forever. So the first important point was the success of the people ensured the supremacy of their opinions, the supremacy of the parliament. So the next important point is supremacy of the parliament was established. This was the second outcome of the Glorious Revolution. If we see the struggle which was started with the accession of James II lasted till the end of Stout dynasty. Stout dynasty, the Stout dynasty starts from 1603, and then we have Charles I, and then Charles II, and then James II. So this the dynasty that starts from the 1603 and lasted till 1714. This era and this dynasty is known as Stout dynasty. Even William and Mary also comes in this dynasty. So the supremacy of the parliament was established as a result of the Glorious Revolution. The revolution of 1688 decided the issue which even the civil war of 1642 civil war that was fought between 1642 to 1649 when the King Charles I was executed and Cromwell came to the throne, and then R1 Charles II, and then James II. So in that meantime, when the civil war was fought, even this issue was not solved. As a result of that revolution where bloodshed took place, still the issue was not resolved. But in this Glorious Revolution, what was the issue? The issue was the supremacy of the parliament was not ensured. But as a result of this revolution, the supremacy of the parliament was surely ensured. So this was the second. This is the second important outcome of the Glorious Revolution. And third is the establishment of the constitutional government in place of the despotic rule. The revolution did not give right to vote, and the king continued to form his ministry as he wished. but it gave a death blow to despotism and introduced an era of constitutionalism. The king lost his right of dispensing within suspending of the laws. He could make no laws, he could levy no arbitrary taxes or maintain a standing army during peacetime. He could not put anybody behind the bars or punish them by using his prerogatives. It established a constitutional form of government. Earlier, the king was a sole power and he could do whatever he would wish. But now, as a result of this constitutional government, the parliament would decide the rule of law. Parliament would decide the to levy taxes or not, or either increase the taxes or decrease the taxes, and nobody uh, nobody shall be put behind the bars as the king would do so. Now Parliament was this constitutional government was completely in a position to decide the matters pertaining to the daily life of the people. So this third important point is the establishment of the constitutional government, and that constitutional government greatly constrained the power of the king, and the constitutional government was sole authority in those matters and problems resolutions. So the fourth outcome of the glorious revolution was the independence of the judiciary was established. Earlier, judiciary was playing in the hand of James II, and James II, as we talked about in the previous lecture, that he even established a church, established a judiciary which is known as ecclesiastical court, through which he would convert people from Protestantism to Catholicism. But now judiciary was completely independent. Even the salaries was fixed. Earlier, no fixed salary, and they were working on very low remuneration. Now they had fixed salary as well as increased their salaries. So this independence of judiciary was the next outcome of the glorious revolution. And the fifth important outcome of the glorious revolution is the fate of Roman Catholicism was doomed forever in England. Catholicism, where James II was Catholic by faith, now they accepting the declaration, right of declaration by William and his wife. So the Catholicism received a huge blow, and Catholicism was actually the religion of Rome. So the Parliament uh, ensured, and the Parliament sought consensus of the William and his wife Mary to embrace or to accept the declaration right. In the declaration right was there are points in the declaration of rights, and we will talk about it in the next lecture, that what are the main important points of declaration of rights. So Catholicism was doomed forever in England, and Protestantism was given kind of a rise, and it was supported all in all. So this was the next outcome, that Catholicism received a huge blow as a result of glorious revolution. And the sixth important outcome of the glorious revolution was the beginning of the era of religious toleration. Earlier, James II was very stubborn, obstinate, and very strict in his faith. Even he was forcefully converting people from Protestantism to Catholicism. But now, accepting the Declaration of Rights and the supremacy of Parliament, William and his wife, they were very much tolerant, and they were very much flexible in their religious ideology and religious and even in their faith. So thus the era of religious toleration and flexibility began with the Glorious Revolution. Uh, in that at that time, even the Act of Toleration was passed. In this act, though rights were not given to the Catholics, but they were given space in the social fabric of England. Uh, and there were not only Catholics, there were conformist and non-conformist and dissenting Protestant, such as uh, Baptist. So all these people were tolerated, and all of them were given religious space to worship and mm, to perform their religious rituals. So the beginning of the period of religious toleration was another outcome or result of Glorious Revolution. And the most important result of the Glorious Revolution was England become a first-rate European power. So Charles II and James II, who sold their foreign policy to the French King Louis XIV, and he was deciding the policies of England and even making the policies of England. Uh, Once William came to the throne of England, uh, even he fought a war and defeated the French army. And as a result of this defeat, French were badly suffered, and thus the English became a first-rate power in the Europe. In the war that took place between France and England at that time, it took place in 1697, I think, yes, 97. And as a result of this war, the lordship of William on England was accepted by Louis XIV, the King of France. Earlier, he was not ready to accept William as the King of England, but as a result of this defeat and a treaty was concluded at Ryswick in 1697, through which France or Louis XIV accepted the lordship of William over England. And the last and important point of the Glorious Revolution results was England was forced to take part in the European politics. Earlier, England was set aside and could not take part in the European politics. But now England uh, jumped into the European politics. William had accepted the throne of England in order to take her help against Louis XIV of France. Because France was already a power, in this regard, it was kind of liability on William to make allies in order to get strengthened against Louis XIV. So in this regard, he mended alliances with various other powers of Europe. So getting part in the politics resulted in the making of England a great power. So making alliances in order to defeat France and in order to defeat France and become a first rate power in England herself in Europe. Uh, However, Holland was a dagger-drawn enemy of France, and they had a kind of enmity. There was going on for the last 125 years. They were fighting each other, and they were dagger-drawn enemies. So England took the side of Holland, making alliances with Holland in order to become a power to take stand against France. So thus England took part in the European politics. Uh, so this is all about the results, the outcome of glorious revolution. Today, let's have recap the entire discussion. We talked about the events that led to the glorious revolution. That some events that we talked about was the mm, how this revolution took place, means what were those events that paved the way for the revolution or glorious revolution. So we also talked about the outcomes of the glorious revolution, and we also talked about the results of the glorious revolution. So the first important point was why it is called glorious revolution. We talked in detail some important points, so those are enough to talk about. And then we talked about the results of the glorious revolution. So why it is called glorious revolution? It was bloodless revolution. It was based on consensus and compromise. Its results were both permanent and important in nature, and it greatly enhanced the prestige of England. So these are the points due to which glorious revolution, 1688 revolution, is known as glorious revolution. And then we talked about the results of the glorious revolution. So the results: end of their divine right of kings and success of the people. Secondly, supremacy of the parliament was established. Thirdly, establishment of the constitutional government that we talked about in detail. And fourthly, independence of judiciary was established. And fifthly, the fate of Roman Catholicism was doomed in England forever. And sixthly, beginning of the period of the religious toleration took place in England. And seventhly, England once again begin a first-rate power in European. And eighthly, England entangled in the European politics. So this is all about the glorious revolution. We talked about the events that made possible the glorious revolution. Then we covered the next topic, why 1688 a revolution is new. 1688 revolution is called glorious revolution. And then we talked about the outcome of the glorious revolution. So thank you so much for this today's discussion, and we will be talking about the next topic in the next lecture. Thank you so much for watching, and we are reading your comments. So kindly comment and ask question if there is any problem. Thank you so much.